can use these side pieces or not, depending on the situation. But when the water comes and hits that first step, it'll hit that drainage stone and go in there. Maybe it'll fill up, overflow going to the next one. And then that water can work its way into the ground instead of, again, shooting off toward your water body. Porous pavements are probably the most intense practice that we promote. But the idea there is instead of just having a patio or a walkway with pavers with grout in between, which you can imagine water will not go through those pavers and that grout. But if you, under the pavers, if you put a layer, again, of that drainage stone, a different kind of stone, hole in the ground filled with stone, you put a layer of that drainage stone, you put your pavers on top of them and space them out a little bit where the grout would go, but you don't use any grout. That way when the water hits it, it goes, to the edges of those pavers into that sub-base of drainage stone, and it soaks into the ground right there. So there's lots of different kinds too. I've seen, there's a picture here, this grid type thing that they use them on boat launches and other places like that where you get a lot of erosion and runoff. It's an open grid. You lay it out, you fill it with stone or gravel or sand, or sometimes people use them in overflow parking areas. You fill it with some soil and grass seed, and it's just like a reinforced parking area. So there's lots of different types of pavers. If you look up geogrids or grass pavers, you'll see lots of different ideas regarding those. But again, the idea is that you have that reservoir underneath, the water goes in there and slowly infiltrates into the ground. A rain garden, this is a personal favorite. Does anybody know about rain gardens or have one in their yard or seen one or worked on one? Joan has. So what a rain garden is, it's basically just a perennial garden, but it's sunken down into the ground a little bit. So the water is directed into that garden, and it creates a pool where the water can hang out there for a little while and then again slowly soak into the ground. You can see on the bottom picture there, it's called, we call it a ponding area. The top black dashed line is where the yard, that used to be the top of the yard, and you dig out a garden area, you fill it back up with some growing medium like you would for any garden, and you plant it. But when you're all done, now the top of that garden is at that bottom dashed line, so that when it rains, the water you can hook it up to your roof and your downspout, or it can capture water coming off your lawn, your driveway, your patio, your walkway, but it has that ponding area, so you can imagine it's like a kiddie pool sunk into the ground. So the water gets in there, ponds up, and then soaks in. And we have actually a wonderful plant guide for rain gardens. We were lucky enough to work with a woman named Kathy Neal. She was a PhD horticulturist at UNH Extension. She's retired now, but she always wanted to make a rain garden plant list, and I was lucky enough to work with her and research and put that list together. So that's another resource that we have at nh.org. So if you wanted to do a rain garden and don't know what to plant in it, just look at our list and that'll help you out. Good old-fashioned rain barrel. I should say those 6 are what we call our true infiltration practices that we promote. As I kept repeating, they're just ways to get the water there where it is and have it stay there and soak in. But there are lots of other things you can do too. Good old-fashioned rain barrel. The knock on those is that they're small, they fill up really quickly. The people get really creative. They do rain barrel chains, where you have one rain barrel that fills up, you take they all have an overflow outlet, you hook it up to a second rain barrel, that one fills up, and so forth. So people have got really creative with them. This was another project that we did with the Great Bay Stewards that I mentioned earlier. This homeowner happened to have gutters that the house was split with, as a lot of them are, with downspouts at either end. So we helped them install a rain barrel at either end, so they got twice as much as they would have. Vegetated swale is a way to move the water where you want it to go. Swales are really popular. You see them even by the side of the road. They're really an engineering way to just move water to get it where you want it to go. But for soak up the rain, we don't just want to shoot that water away. So we like vegetated swales, because the vegetation slows the water down. The more vegetation you get in that swale, the slower the water will go. It hits those plants, kind of interrupts their flow. Some of it will soak in. You can see these two pictures are in my neighborhood. One of my neighbors, for reasons unknown to me, he scrapes the vegetation out of it every year and makes a big, sandy, messy, muddy, gouged swale that the water shoots down, and it must just fill that sump at the bottom of that catch basin. The other neighbor leaves it grassed, and when they mow, and these are in the right of way, nobody should be even taking care of them or doing what they're doing, but the other neighbor leaves it grassed, and when they mow their lawn, it just dips down, dips out. So that one functions a little better because it has the vegetation in there. And then this drawing in here, these little, I just drew those in, we call them check dams. So if you have a place in your yard that's acting like a swale and delivering water off your property, you can just build little check dams in there, as we call them. Just take some stone, pile it up, and what happens is the water hits that little pile of stone and it'll pool up there for a little while. Some of it will soak in. It can also give it a chance to drop some of the sediment out of that water. If there's sediment in it, it will overflow the check dam, go to the next one, hit that. So again, it's a way to slow it down, allow some of it to infiltrate, maybe allow some of the sediment to settle out. So kind of a repurposed swale, which is a common thing to see. This is another one of my favorites. They're called water bars. They're just a way, again, to interrupt the water's flow. We've partnered with a couple of camps up on Ossipee to put these in. This particular picture on the top, the first picture is what it looked like before. It was well traveled by the kids. There was like dorms or cabins up at the top of the hill, and they walked down this path to get down to the water's edge. It's very eroded. Water was just shooting down there, bringing water, shooting down into the lake. And we worked with the campers to put these water bars in, which again are just those 4x4 timbers. They're fastened into the ground with, they're partially buried with rebar. They're backfilled with that clean drainage stone. So when the water comes down that slope, it hits that bar, it's at a slight angle. It goes into the area that you created with the stone behind the bar, and it washes off into a vegetated area. Another cool little trick is called a rubber razor. It's another type of water bar. You take 2 pieces of lumber, you sandwich between it and used a repurposed piece of conveyor belt material so that some of the material is sticking up. You bury it in the ground except for some of that material again, and you can drive over it with your bicycle, with a golf cart, with your truck, as you can see. But when the water hits that piece of conveyor belt, again, it shoots off into a vegetated area or somewhere where it can soak in instead of going down your driveway or path and so forth. There are instructions on the website, a link to how to build those. There's great instructions at the Portland, Maine Water District for those rubber razors, so we just put a link right in there to get to the instructions for those. And if you're going to ask me where can I get some of that conveyor belt material, if you want to do these, let me know. I have a source, so we can hook you up with some of that if you need it. Another wonderful thing you can do for a lake, especially if you're lucky enough to live on the lake, is to leave or create a vegetated buffer. So that's just the vegetation that should be between the water and wherever, the part of your yard or lawn where you sit or play or so forth. Because it's just so important to keep that soil in place and keep those natural areas along the water's edge. When you remove that material, which is actually illegal to do, you cannot legally remove brush from a water's edge, and the shoreland program requires you to leave a certain amount of trees and so forth, so that's another subject and area, but we want and need natural plants along our water's edge. They keep that shoreland stable. So you can see that middle picture there, that is a natural buffer. somebody on Pleasant Lake. We worked with those folks to do some work. They just had a beautiful natural buffer up by the house. They had a place where they could, you know, sit in their chairs. That vegetation was low, so you can see right over it. Didn't hurt their view at all. Over here at Wentworth Lake, we didn't do this project. It was somebody's house we visited. They didn't have a buffer there, so you can see they just did some plantings. Again, it helps keep that shoreland, the shoreline stable, so that sediment doesn't loosen up and wash into the lake and cause those problems we were talking about earlier. So those are the 10 practices that we promote and have instructions for. And there are also lots of things you can do that we just call good housekeeping. For example, when you keep your vehicles in good maintenance so that they're not leaking oil and gas and so forth in your driveway, and that's washing off to the lake. We wash your car at a commercial car wash facility or because they recycle, they have to collect and clean and recycle that water, or collect it and clean it anyway. But if you do it in your driveway, again, some of that junk is just washing off to a water body. Or do it on your lawn, so that if your lawn will soak that water in. If you don't need as big a lawn as you have, maybe let some of the areas go back to natural, or plant them to have a nice garden area, which can also, has other benefits like providing natural habitat for our bees and birds and pollinators. And using a little less salt in the winter where you can. I know I said sand is a bad thing, but if you need to use a little more sand rather than salt, on balance, that's probably a good thing at this point. Salt is becoming what we call an emerging pollutant of concern. Our freshwater bodies are getting salty because of the salt that we need to put on our roads and so forth to keep ourselves safe. And there are programs. The state has a program called Green Snow Pro, where snow plow guys or people, I should say, not guys, operators who salt and sand our roads are trained to use less salt and do things like mix brine ahead of time. It's a whole big program. If your town is not involved in it, I would suggest that they check it out because it can help reduce the amount of salt that's needed. And again, we mentioned responsible lawn care. Just a lot of our soils in New Hampshire don't need to be fertilized. You can go grow a pretty good lawn without doing it. So we recommend, rather than doing it, I'm supposed to do it 2 times a year or 3 times a year, wait and see how it looks. If your lawn looks pretty good, you don't need to fertilize it. You might be helping out the lake along the way. The next slide, on page 11 here, I already mentioned, there's lots of photo galleries, instructions. The plant list is on the website. We have flow charts on there that just kind of walk you through, like, I'd like to do something, but I don't know, Lisa talked about all these things. I don't know, where should I start? So it kind of gives you a little flow chart, and you can identify an area in your yard that kind of looks like this. What could I consider? So we tried to just pack that website with lots of different resources. And then the last bit we have here is that we want you to look at think about your home or your place, your lake place, or your wherever you live. Again, remember we talked about some of these things being next to the lake, but everybody lives in a watershed, and like you could live as far away from the lake as you could be in your watershed, but some of your water, if it's running off your property, it could be getting to that water body. So think about, do I have runoff coming off my roof or driveway going to a collection system? Do I have eroded paths in my yard? Is there